of Leah Masha Basara. Rebbetzin Leanne Cohen is going for a operation tomorrow, and please God, Hashem will make her well and successfully, so quickly.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Right, teach us, Kev.
Okay. So this week's parsha, so I'm going to chop and change if I find interesting stuff. So
Gavin can go and get something to eat as long as he can hear us. There's no issue, Gavin.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
So this
I'm
week's
waiting for the
parsha
F-Ray
is Parshat Bahaslocha.
Okay.
Baha'atzlocha, if you say, like, it sounds like Hatzlacha, but anyway. So Bahatzlotcha. And one of the things in the parsha is the Jews are wandering they're still in the 40-year wandering stage, and some of the people that tagged along with them were known as the Eruv Rav, who were troublemakers, and I think they weren't sincere converts, and they tagged along for the ride, and they caused a lot of trouble, and they were involved with the Chet HaEgel, the golden calf, and in this week's parsha, the Jews were given manna to eat, manna that fell from the sky, and to gather it, and they had to gather it on Friday, they had to gather a double portion. They gathered it on Shabbos, it turned into worms, and the manna tasted however you wanted to, like fillet steak or pizza, whatever, or chicken, whatever you wanted it to taste, it tasted like. So they
You mean ribeye?
Not ribeye, exactly, yeah.
Ribeye.
And they started complaining to Moses that they used to have, there was onions, and there was watermelon, and there was fish in abundance, and cucumbers in Egypt, and now they're getting this manna, and Hashem got very angry with them. And they also complained I don't know if it was in the previous week's parsha, about not having meat. So Hashem sent a whole lot of quail, and the quail were just everywhere. And they said the quail was coming through their teeth, and then he actually put a plague upon them, and they died. And the point is satisfied with what they have, and it was also, I think, a lack of emunah, but I mean, we don't understand it on our level. But these people and caused trouble, and caused plagues, and caused bad situations, and I'm just trying to think of a point to make here, is that we need to see sometimes who's sincere and who's insincere, and what the intentions of people are in terms of the Yiddishkeit or everything. Because sometimes they can cause real problems if we have people who have an agenda, a negative agenda, and that's it, and results in unfortunate in tragedies.
Agree.
Thanks, Kevin. Listen, the first part of your drosh tonight made me incredibly hungry. Yeah, so I'm even more hungry. All you spoke about was fillet steak and all this lovely food that these guys.
And it was a super drosha, Gavin, because I'm drinking soup.
It was a super drosha, 100%. Thanks, but
I
appreciate it.
You like that one?
Very nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think that was a good lesson. So, just quickly. Okay. Remember, there were two opinions. There was the opinion of Shmuel and Yochanan. Anybody know whose Shmuel opinions was versus Rav Yochanan regarding the signature? Yes or no?
Regarding the
signature of the creditor, getting instructing the debtor to pay him. What's Shmuel's opinion? What's Rav Yochanan's opinion? All right, guys.
I think was one of them involving actually having witnesses. One of them, I can't remember.
I think one has to do a little better. So Rav Yochanan basically said that if you send your signatory and not a legal representative, your signatory or your stamp, sometimes people had the family emblem stamp, etc., had to be notarized by 2 witnesses, like almost a commission of oath sort of thing, to validate it was your signature. That's according to Rav Yochanan. According to Shmuel, that's not sufficient. So we say, according to Shmuel, how would you collect money from a debtor if you're a creditor and you're overseas? They're overseas. So this issue came up about what would you do? Well, the first thing of it is, according to Shmuel, you'd need an agent that you appointed as your legal representative in front of 2 witnesses signing and attesting to that verbal declaration. But a signature isn't sufficient. So still, as far as Shmuel is concerned, the Gemara would answer that even according to Shmuel, that the creditor can act in accordance with that which was done when Rav Abba had a loan outstanding against Rav Yosef Bava Kamma. Rav Abba said to Rav Safra, who was traveling to Rav Yosef Bava Kamma's locale, when you return, bring me the money. When Safra went there and requested the payment from the family, Rava is actually the son of Rav Yosef Bava Kamma. Rava said to him, well, how do I know that Rav Abba sent you? Did he write a receipt for you stating, I, Rav Abba, have received payment through Rav Safra's collection of it? Rav Safra said, no, he didn't give me a document like that. So Rava said, well, then you need to go back and let him write for you that receipt stating, I've received payment through Rav Safra's collection of it, and then we can entrust the payment to you. And then he thought about it for a few minutes and he said, listen, there's going to be a bit of a problem. Why? Because even if he writes for you, I've received payment through Rav Safra's collection from it, it's worthless. Because Rav Abba's an old man. And in those days in the Gemara, your legal extension or your agency could only occur if the person that had sent that agent is still alive and well. It works differently legally today. Legally, an agent can still act on the person's behalf, even if that person is no longer in existence by virtue of secular law. I mean, it's different when you've got an executive in the estate, because he's acting on behalf of the interest of the estate. It doesn't mean that person has to be alive, but the estate itself is considered a legal entity, just like you've got a proprietary, limited, closed corporation, etc. They're legal entities. In those days, you didn't have it in the same way. And we've done legal entities to indemnify a person, because you can have one lousy transaction and it can switch your lights out. Therefore, in order to protect a person against being sued by for one transaction that can render him pretty broke, we've offered a little bit of protection to encourage the entrepreneurial spirit. So we say, well, look, it's a problem because Rav Abba's old, and if he died and Rav Safra is his agent, Rav Safra ceases to be his agent. Then if the money disappears, the heirs of Rav Abba can turn around and say, well, they never got paid because Rav Safra wasn't representing the heirs. So Rava said it's a problem. So what has to happen is there has to be a particular case in terms of remedy. So Rav Safra asked Rava, well, what is the remedy? What do you suggest? So Rava said to him, look, go and let Rav Abba convey the money to you by dint of land so that you'll become a new creditor, and then come and you yourself write for us, I've received the money. Okay? And basically, what does this mean? Well, it's pretty simple. Remember in Kedushin 26a, which we're going to do in the Daf Yomi after Gittin, it teaches that movable property, like money, can be conveyed from one person to another without the recipient taking physical hold of it. So rather what happens is the owner conveys to the recipient a piece of real property, even a minute portion of land. It could be half a meter and worthless, that you couldn't even grow a weed on it. So And basically what you're doing, he performs the kinyan on the land, and then that person automatically acquires the stipulated movables along with it, wherever those movables may be at the time. And that's the key essential part. The movables don't have to be on their physical land. It could just be by mere association of the land, meaning the movables could be in Italy, and the land itself could be in Eretz Israel. But because they come together as a package parcel, like maybe you've got the tractor still in Italy and the parcel of land in Eretz Israel, that's fine. You can sell movables with the land. Okay? Now, this method of conveying movables is known as a kinyan agav. It literally means acquisition by dint of, meaning Kevin said agav means, what does agav mean in Hebrew, Kev?
Back.
Yeah, it's on the back of. You get the movables on the back of the land, basically, or by virtue of the land. So, guys, in this manner, Rav Abba could convey to Rav Safra ownership of the money owed to him, even though it was in the possession of Rav Yosef Bava Kamma. Okay, so since Rav had this issue, Rav Safra could collect the money in the capacity of a creditor himself. It doesn't matter whether Rav Abba, the original creditor, is alive at the time. Obviously, in this case, Rav Abba would have to trust Rav Safra completely to return the money to him or his heirs, because technically now he's in possession of the money. Okay, now there is another method of transferring movables without the recipient having to physically take hold of them, and that's called a chalifin, an exchange. The problem is a chalifin excludes money. That's the only problem. So what we are saying is as follows. This is how it would work. Is that Rav Abba would give a piece of land to Rav Safra and say that this is a physical piece of land which you would have to be present when I gave it to you. And then Rav Safra in his local town would have to actually take a physical kinyan over it by doing some sort of an action by improving the land. But with the kinyan agav, he also gets the movables, but the movables don't have to physically be on the land. So he said, in addition to that, I'm the creditor of Rav Yosef Bava Kamma's debt, and now I'm giving you the money. Okay, so he gives him that little portion of land and the money, and he writes a letter to that fact to Rav Safra. Then Rav Safra goes and says, I'm the new owner of the debt, and you pay me. And he physically goes to see Rava, who's the son of Rav Yosef Bava Kamma, in that particular city, etc., across the world or wherever he was going to meet anyway. And then he would be paid, and then Rav Safra would give the money to Rav Abba if he was alive, or if not, his heirs. It's that straightforward, guys. Doesn't get more complicated than that. Okay? Why would that have to be done? The kinyan agav, who knows? I'm just telling you how it works. I didn't write the law, I just learned it. Okay. So let's just go a little bit further. So the Gemara cites a very similar incident in which this method was employed to retrieve payment of a loan through an agent. So in accordance with that incident in which Rav Papa had a loan of 12,000 zuzim outstanding against someone in the town of Hozai, and he conveyed the money to Rav Shmuel bar Abba, who was traveling to Hozai, by dint of the threshold of his house, so that Rav Shmuel bar Abba would be able to retrieve it from the debtor. When Rav Shmuel bar Abba came back with the money, Rav Papa was so overjoyed that he went as far as Tavach to meet him. In other words, you could imagine, because remember we said initially this concept was in Bava Metzia 46a. We mentioned previous concepts that were in Bava Metzia 98, in the 98 stuff. Okay, where else would you find this concept? Okay, Bava Metzia 46a, Bava Basra 77b, and 150b. Okay, so it's not a new concept. It's seen throughout the Bavas. So basically, the threshold, which is attached to the ground, is considered real property. So Rav Papa conveyed the money to Rav Shmuel Bar Abba, together with the threshold, by means of a kinyan agav. And what this did is it in turn allowed the borrower to repay the loan to Rav Shmuel Bar Abba without any concern for further liability. And then obviously Rav Papa trusted him, but you have to trust the person. Okay. Now we're going to be dealing with a different issue. In our Mishnah, I'm just going to share the screen with you. Okay. Now, I don't know if you can see this part. If the victim dies, the robber must return the stolen property to the heirs. The Mishnah discusses cases in which the robber confesses this false oath, thus incurring the obligation to pay the principal plus 1/5, and his obligation was later reduced in some manner. Okay? So we're dealing with this issue at the moment. Can you all see it, guys?
Yeah.
All right. So if the robber paid the victim the principal, etc., but did not pay him the 5th, he need not
I don't see it.
I took it off the screen.
Want to see his face? Ah. No, I saw it and it went. I thought, okay, did you finish?
Okay, so
Sorry, my mistake,
all we're focusing on the moment is the following line. If the robber paid the victim the principal, so what we're trying to learn from this is, okay, so he paid him the principal, but what happens if he didn't pay him the 5th surcharge? Does he need to then pursue his victim? And the reason why the Gemara seeks to determine whether the Torah imposed the surcharge of 1/5 as a debt on the perjurer, so that his victim has a legal claim against him for the additional amount, or maybe, guys, it's merely a mitzvah to pay the victim that amount in atonement for his sin, but it did not award the victim a claim against him. So all we're saying is basically if the perjurer owes his victim the 5th, in addition to the principal, the victim may sue for payment of the surcharge, just as a victim can sue the thief for payment of the principal. But if, on the other hand, the payment of the surcharge is just a mitzvah of atonement, the victim can't sue the perjurer for the payment. Rather, the perjurer is actually personally charged with that commandment to atone for his misdeed by paying his victim the surcharge and then bringing an Asham offering to Hashem. But the victim can't legally enforce it. So we want to know, can the victim enforce it? In other words, is it a legal issue or is it a kapara issue? So, so to this end, the Gemara basically draws an inference from the Mishnah statement that the robber need not pursue his victim in order to pay the fee. Okay, so we can see, guys, that the 1/5 surcharge is a monetary obligation from the robber towards his victim, and accordingly, if he dies, his heirs must pay it. Okay, so what that means in a nutshell is, if the Mishnah found it necessary to teach that the robber is not required to pursue his victim to any faraway town, and just use media as an example, in order to pay the 5th, we can infer that he does, however, owe the victim this money. And the only reason it's different from the principle is that the robber doesn't have to incur an exorbitant expense for the sake of delivering it. Okay, so that's the basic principle. In other words, number one, it's a monetary obligation legally. But number two, with the principle, even if the travel and accommodation and logistic charge, after one swears falsely, supersedes the value of the principal because there's a false oath, you have to spend that money to return it to the victim. But that's for the principal, not the surcharge. If the money is too high for the surcharge, because remember the surcharge is only 1/5, you don't have to pursue the victim. You can tell the victim you'll pay him when he gets back into town. As far as the rabbinical enactment is concerned, people were not going to spend far more on the logistics of delivering money than the principal was worth. So they stopped trying to pay unless the court forced them. So what would happen is that the 1/5 surcharge, which is tied to the principal, both of them are teshuvah. Why? Is that there's no teshuvah of the 1/5 surcharge in the Asham offering. That is only enforced once you have a false oath as a robber or a thief. And the principal is what you owe anyway for the actual theft or robbery. So you need a kapora to pay the atonement, the principal for the actual theft. The 1/5 surcharge in the Asham offering, the 1/5 surcharge goes to the victim, the Asham offering to Hashem, and that's for the kapora of the false oath. So we're saying for the 1/5 surcharge that goes to the victim, it is a monetary obligation. He can sue for it, but he cannot, the court will not enforce the robber spending an exorbitant amount superseding that for him to travel. It suffices that he has it for the victim when he returns. There was then the teshuvah aspect of the rabbinical enactment. So far it's been biblical. And that was the principal and the surcharge would be given to the court-appointed agent upon the return of the victim, to know that it's gone to a safe party to deliver it. Otherwise, nobody would make it teshuvah nor pay the principal. Okay? So, since it's a monetary obligation, what happens? It creates a lien on one's property, which remains in effect even after the robber or thief dies. So now, guys, since the Mishnah indicates that the surcharge is a debt that the robber owes to his victim, and that's for a false oath, the robber's heirs will have to satisfy it from the estate even after his death. I mean, it goes without saying that if payment of the surcharge was just a mitzvah prescribed for atonement, it would not create a lien on the robber's property, and the heirs would not have to pay for it. So that's fairly clear. Now, let me just check something.
Damon?
Yeah.
But for the full atonement, the principal plus the surcharge plus the Asham offering have to all take place, or have to, the two payments have to be paid plus the Asham offering for a complete exoneration.
Yes, but the atonement's for two separate crimes. The one crime is theft, at which it's just the principal. The one for surcharge is to the victim for messing him around. That's atonement to the victim. And atonement to Hashem for taking his name in vain is an Asham offering. Okay? So yeah, it is a court-imposed duty as far as the victim is concerned. In terms of the Asham offering, well, we're going to discuss if they can take that from the estate or not. But in any event, Kevin, the Gemara draws a similar inference from another clause in our Mishnah, because if after swearing falsely and confessing, the robber paid the victim the principal, because sometimes you do the right thing and then a person reverts back to their shocking nature. So, okay, he swore falsely, confessed, paid the victim the principal, but then all of a sudden, he didn't pay the one for surcharge. And then he was sued for payment again, and he swore falsely, and he said, no, don't worry, I paid the fee. And later he felt bad, and then he confessed to this as well. So what does that mean, Kevin? There's a surcharge and a surcharge. There's a fifth of a fifth that he denied under oath, okay? So even that one for surcharge of the fifth is also a monetary obligation that he owes his victim, okay? So, because the Torah imposes a surcharge only if you swore falsely in denial of the monetary obligation. But if the original surcharge was not a genuine debt, the robber wouldn't incur an additional surcharge on account of denying it under oath. Meaning, there are certain cases that if it's under a pruta, Kevin, and you deny you owe it, there's no atonement basis for that because it's not an amount where it's got any legal standpoint to collect it. You might have an atonement aspect you have to pay, but the court can't enforce it because it's not worthy of a court case. So what we're saying here in a very simple way is that, let's see what it would be. So say the principal is 80, Zuz. Then the surcharge is 20. Okay? Now, what would happen is, by the way, if it was from the inner part of the 80, you should only owe 16 Zuz Arthur. Arthur? No. Can you explain to me what I mean? I know you're there. I can see you. I love you to boot. But I want you to explain it.
I can't at the moment.
All right.
I
So
got
let
to
me
the
explain to
16
you what I
zuz.
mean, Arthur.
16 is the fifth of 80.
No. So there's an in and out. We learned this, Arthur, with regards to the lulav and etrog. So we learned this where
I remember this.
when you had to make it mahuda, beautify it, you can only pay 1/3 extra. Okay? So they wanted to know if it was an extra where you paid 800 or 900 zuz. Do you remember that? So you say, what are you talking about? So you say the mahuda, the beautiful one for the lulav and etrog, was 900 zuz, and the ordinary one was 600. So the third was on the total, so the 2/3 was the ordinary from the total. Now, if you say you add a third extra, then if the base cost is 600 zuz, you should only be paying an extra 200 zuz, which is 800 zuz. In other words, if the baseline for the average 600 zuz and you add a third to that, it's only 800 zuz. Do you get that, Arth?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, so Arth, what I'm saying, there's two ways to work out a third, from the inner or the outer part. In other words, if I say the baseline is 600 zuz, but to beautify it, you add a third, that only makes it that you pay for the mahuda, the beautiful one, 800 instead of 600, because you add a third to the average price of the average quality grade. Okay?
Okay.
So that would be 800 instead of 600. If I say that the mahuda was 900, then the ordinary one would be 600 if you're working it the other way around from the total, because 900 divided by 3 is 300 zuz each. So you're saying 2/3 is the ordinary, which is 600 zuz, and that extra third is the mahuda, the 900. So you either get a total of 800 or 900. That's what we learnt with the lulav and etrog. It depends the perspective at which you want to add a third. Do you work out the third from the total amount of the mahuda? Okay, or do you work it out from the average and add it on top? You'll get the difference between 800 or 900 shekels, depending which way you view it.
Yeah.
You're not processing a thing, are you?
No. What I'm trying to figure out, I mean, the other way is basically you divide by 2 and times by 3. The other one, you just divide by 3 and you go and you times by 2. So I don't know what the confusion there is. Why
The
is
confusion
between
is that
800 and
when it
900?
said the mahuda, let me explain to you carefully. When you say the mahuda is you can pay only up to a third more and no more. That was the guideline. So we're saying, listen, generally, was it the third from the total or the third added on to the base price? And that's the confusion.
Okay.
Was the calculation worked that for the mahuda you pay 900, so the average you pay the 600 zuz, because you're only paying 2/3 of it? Or do we say that you pay 600 for the normal and you only add 1/3 onto that on the total, which gives you 800 zuz instead of 900? So which way
I
do
would
we
actually
work?
agree with. I think it would be the second way where you take the 600 and add it on, because people, you have to have a base to add on.
Okay,
You
so
gotta
I
understand
agree.
it's
I
like
agree.
the other way
I
you're
agree with.
guessing. Otherwise, you're guessing what it would be, but the other one you know what it is. Like it's 600, so you add it on. But the 900, well, it could be 600, but you don't actually know.
Yeah, but the problem is in this particular calculation, it's counterintuitive with the surcharge. Because with the surcharge, if you say it's a 1/5 surcharge on 80 zuz, it should be 16. Because what you do in your maths is you take 8 times 2, and 8 times 2 is 16. So 16 zuz is the 1/5 out of the 8. Kevin, I learned shortcut maths. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
I can see that because it's not the normal way to do what you're doing.
Okay, but do you understand how it's correct?
Sort
Gavin,
of, but I understand the inside and outside 100%.
Okay, no. But what I'm saying is, if you had a look at 1/5 of 80, it's 16. Okay, it's not 20. But the Gemara says that you have 80 zuz as the principal, you add 20. Okay, because you work it from the total, which is 100 zuz. That's what the Gemara says. So the principal is worked out as the total, which is higher. That's what the Gemara
which is
says.
a great. So the Gemara says is going for the second method, which is taking the total and the 100, like you say, and taking off the first, so 20, as opposed to going for the inner, taking 80 times.
Correct. So correct.
16.
So they're saying the principal is in the Schottenstein. They say the principal is 80, and the surcharge is 20 because your total amount is 100.
Yeah. So they're using the outer. So is that what the rabbis say? That's the majority. Yeah.
So that's what they say, and they say if you lie on the 1/5 and 1/5, you actually add 5 zuz, which means you owe 25 zuz. Now,
just explain that 1/5 of 1/5 again. Sorry, I didn't actually. I heard you, but it didn't register properly in my head. Can you do it again?
Okay, so what we're saying is a robber pays the principal, okay, and he pays it, and then they say to him, "But you didn't pay the surcharge." He said, "No, I actually did." Okay, so they leave it alone because it's for his atonement. It's monetary, but it's like he's got to do it himself. You know what I mean? And then he said afterwards he feels bad. He says, "No, I lied about that." Then it's 1/5 of the surcharge. So the surcharge is 1/5 of the principal. The lying of the surcharge, not paying it,
another
is
1/5.
1/5 of 1/5.
So, and it's only got to do with when he lies under, when there's a false oath.
No,
Otherwise,
it only has to do with if a false oath about the surcharge, not the principal.
Yeah. But he's paid the principal already.
Yeah.
But this is purely to do with lying false oath on the 1/5.
Yes. So now it's a surcharge. It's a false oath on the false oath. Yeah. So it's 1/5 of 1/5. So the Gemara uses the example that it's 25 zuz. It should actually be 20 zuz. And the reason it should be 20 zuz is my instinct is like Arthur's actually. Is that what you do is you take 80 zuz and you add 1/5 of that, which is actually only 16 zuz, guys. And then do you get
1/5 of 16?
Yeah. Okay. And then when you've got 1/5 of 16, then you only add 3.2 zuz on that, which is 19.2 zuz. That's 1/5 of 1/5. But the Gemara says 25, which means it actually works it outside in. So it says the principal with the surcharge is 100. The principal would be the 80. So you would have to work out the principal and the surcharge together. And then the principal would come out to whatever it is. And then the 1/5 and 1/5, which would make it, instead of 20, 25. So Arthur's instinct is the same as mine. Arthur? I'm actually agreeing with you, by the way.
How many of the what's it called, the Amorim or whatever, these top guys, how many support your view?
Well, that's what it's. I don't know if I've got much support for my view. I must do, because there's always an argument. But in the Schottenstein, it uses the formulaic principle of the less intuitive method that Arthur and I share. Because Arthur and I would say the baseline would be at the average, and you add the mahuda of 1/3 onto that, which would give you 800, not 900. You don't work it from the total backwards. But it's.
I'm actually on your side as well. I mean, based on everything I've heard, it makes more sense to take. I mean, I would have taken, if no one told me anything, if I didn't have the Gemara with me, and you told me that there's a penalty of 1/5 on the 80, I would take 1/5 of the 80 to 16. And then if there's a penalty, and not if you on the false oath, I take 1/5 of the 16. I would do exactly the same as you.
Correct. I think
it's kind of it's like the most logical way. It's most people would think that. I would think most people in today's world. I don't know how it works
it's like when you add VAT or GST on, right? You don't work out the price and then bring it back. You say, okay, fine,
Yeah.
16 plus 17%.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
yeah, there's
worked out
virtually
25,
nothing.
let's work it backward.
It's very unusual in today's times to kind of have an inclusive thing. It's always taken off that amount, you know. It's very unusual to see this. Maybe in those days they operated more like that.
I hear you. I'll tell you where, listen, guys, I'll tell you where you find it. I'm going to share my screen to show you something with this. Would you mind?
Right?
Yeah,
the
go
Chumash.
ahead. Oh, nice.
Where in the Chumash? Which Parsha?
Now, give me 1 second, guys. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now.
Oh,
I found the note.
I like it. Sorry.
Guys, are you looking at the note?
Yeah, well,
Arthur?
is this a note though?
Yeah, look here, Arthur.
We can see it.
Bava 53b to 54a. For example, if one stole 80 zuz and he swore falsely, he must pay the principal amount 80 plus the surcharge of 20 for a total of 100.
Yeah. So they're doing it from outside in.
So it should be 16. And by the way, 1/5 of 16 is exactly what we said before, right?
The 3.2.
Yeah. So it should be
Yeah.
19.2 zuz, not 25.
Yeah. I'm
So
on
I agree
your
with
side.
you.